I just see the dramatic impact and the dramatic effect of just like not letting your ego as a leader guide your decision making, but like involving the people around you and saying like, what do you think about this? And I really want your honest opinion, and taking that into account. And if you believe that they're like, not just believing, but like also taking risks on what they suggest too, like sometimes like they suggested something and we did it and it didn't work. But you know what? I encouraged them to take those risks again. And it was just an awesome thing.
Welcome to another episode of the Leading to Fulfillment podcast, where everything we talk about is meant to encourage people-first leaders, empower individuals to achieve fulfillment, and to help your organizations become places people love to work. I'm your host, James Laws, and I have an amazing show in store for you. My guest for this episode is Jonathan Dumas. Jonathan is the founder and owner of Common Culture Coaching and Consulting, which specializes in helping leaders eliminate the line between their work self and their personal self in order for them to be their full, authentic selves in both. He holds a Master of Science in Organizational Psychology with a focus on diversity and leadership, and is passionate about empowering leaders to create equitable spaces for those around them. Jonathan also hosts a podcast of his own called Real Talk with Dumas, where he has meaningful and substantive conversations on society and culture. In my conversation with Jonathan, we discuss removing the barrier between the personal and professional self, redefining culture fit and rethinking our hiring practices, the power structure of organizational culture and becoming more equitable and diverse, and the value of diversity in creating a fulfilling work culture. But before we jump right into my conversation with Jonathan, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the Leading to Fulfillment podcast in your favorite podcast tool. We are on YouTube if that's where you watch podcasts, but we're also on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much everywhere else you can find podcasts. So if you like the show, head on over there, subscribe, and perhaps even consider leaving us a review. Now that we got all that past us, let's jump into my conversation with Jonathan Dumas. Jonathan, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. This is an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you reaching out.
I really appreciate it. I was looking over some of your material and some of your history and the work that you've done, and I see that there's quite a bit of overlap in some of the things that we talk about. And although we might not use the same words, and which is what I think will be interesting to kind of dive into that. So from my perspective, it's the idea of like work-life integration, having hard conversations, and then this idea of creating kind of just, equitable, and fulfilling work environments and organizational cultures. And so I think there's a lot of overlap around that. And so I want to kind of start off on that first one. I talk a lot about on our blog and in the podcast, I talk a lot about work-life integration, and I kind of fight against this idea of work-life balance, because I just don't think that's any of us are looking to balance our work and our lives. And I think we're more
Yep.
complex than that, right? We're
Yeah.
not just half work and half life. We're a whole bunch of different things, and we want to integrate all of those things to be a complete and total self. You talk about the work self or the professional self
Mm.
and the personal self, and trying to remove the barrier between these two. Can you talk about how you think those ideas that you have, maybe how those things come out and how they may be different from maybe how I think about work-life integration?
No, I love that. And I even love your framing of like, how can we integrate those things together? How I view those things is in the past, when we look at like how organizations like told us how we're supposed to act, right? Is like, leave your personal stuff at the door, just
Yeah.
come in, right? But I think even particular for, me as a Black man, there is so many societal things that I cannot leave at the door. There's so many things that exist and permeate everywhere I am. So it's really impossible for me to leave, my Blackness at the door. And so I think as I started to digest this, think about this, even speak about this a lot, and work with my coaching clients on this a lot, is that how do we get rid of this idea that we have to separate the two. Like, I don't think that those things are even possible for anybody. Even the, I guess, the quote unquote status quo of who belongs in corporate America or within organizations. And so how I even think about those things, it's like, um, we have to create, there has to be some level of harmony, right? We can't like disavow from our personal self, our our work self. It's like the whole person, and I want to show up holistically in both. And so that's how I kind of like view those things. And I just love the integration piece, how you framed it's really good stuff.
And you talk, and speaking about that, you talk about a part of that, me being a white guy
Mm,
doesn't think about. Like, I think about, like, yeah, you're right. You can't always leave your personal life at the door. Like,
mm,
when you come to work, you are your personal life. And
yeah,
honestly, let's be honest, as an employer, I hired your personal life because your
exactly,
personal life and those experiences are part of who you are,
exactly.
and help make my business and the business and the team
Mm,
more full. And but I never, I that idea of, right, like, I think about it of, like, you have trouble, or the kids are cranky, or the wife,
mhm.
you got to fight with your wife, or all those things. I didn't even think about this idea, like you can't leave your blackness
Yeah,
at the door. You're like, that's not something that can be separated, and yet it comes with stuff, right? It
yeah.
comes with stuff that you have been carrying with you, and now it's you, and you can't just separate that. And I think that's something I guess I hadn't considered when I think about even that, leaving your personal life at the door.
Absolutely. And I mean, how could you, number one, but two, it's like not even just like the negative things, right? Like we think about all the things that happen in the news. We think about all the inequity that exists within, in particular, our context in the U.S. Like U.S. American like context in society.
Yeah.
But like I even think about like my culture, my Black culture is just like there's so much richness and fullness there that actually enhances our corporate cultures, actually enhances our organizational cultures, our teams, everything about it. And so I think for me, I absolutely love my Blackness and my Black culture and everything that I come from. And I think there is a richness that adds. And so and adds to it. And so like I've gotten to a place where like I work for myself now. So that's um I'm thinking about this about who I work with at this point. But like if I don't no longer like code switch anymore. You know, if I'm gonna do a presentation or a keynote, like I'm gonna let myself shine through it because like this is who I am, you know, and I, there is significant value there. And so like if you are um, unaware or don't know or don't understand that language, it shouldn't be my job necessarily to um, conform, right? Conform. Like
Right.
you probably should hire somebody or choose somebody that kind of like fits that mold. But then we also get into some other biasy things, hiring practices, all those different things about culture fit, yada yada yada. And so like I just don't believe in like conformity um, for the sake of money, for the sake of like a position or anything like that. Personally, I'd rather I really encourage folks to like, hey, if a place doesn't like appreciate you for all of you, even like the mess um, that potentially comes with, not like bad employee kind of mess, but like there's
Right.
just things that come with um, individual stories that make them who they are. How can you partner and work with them and support them uh, to be like to make this an equitable place for everybody, a just place for everybody? So yeah,
And I love that you talked about that culture fit, and I kind of know where I kind of already can tell where you're going with that a little bit, because I think about that too. We
yeah,
talk about fit, like we talk about
hmm,
fit when we hire, and we're looking for people who are the right fit. And
hmm,
yeah, we are looking for people who are the right culture fit, but we have to be careful what
hmm,
we mean when we say that. I look at it as, I'm hiring for core values a lot of
hmm,
times. I'm looking for
yeah,
people who match our core values.
yep,
But on top of that, I'm also looking for people who are going to make us what I aspire us to be.
mm,
And that
hmm,
means sometimes hiring people that are different from our current culture. And sometimes that culture fit is hiring people who don't actually match the culture that you currently have. They
yep,
are going to bring something that adds to the culture that you want to be. And I think that's a big part of culture fit as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. And there's a way about going about it. Like you have, I mean, you have these things that you like you have to hit your organizational goals, right? You have to,
Yeah.
meet these deadlines. You need somebody that knows how to do the job, that can do the job, right? But there's like these abstract things that actually lends itself to like sometimes explicit bias, not just implicit bias of just like saying like, oh, it just wasn't a culture fit. Like, what about that person wasn't a culture fit? They got together, y'all were having a good time, and then it got down to the final, you know, this person, or it was they were the final choice, and then all of a sudden somebody had a disagreement on like, I don't think that they fit the mold of this organization. Well, what does that mean, right? And even there's ways to even combat that within yourself or interrogate that within yourself of like having somebody that can check that, using language like culture add. I love how you said like this, what can this person add to our community? What can this person add to our organization, our culture that actually makes us better or gets us or changes direction so that we're getting closer to where we want to land. Yeah, I love that. And I feel like, when I used to recruit, I used to I used to like that. I used to think of like all these transferable skills that could like work within like a team. Like if I'm recruiting for something, I'm like, oh, you know what? I think this person could fit because they did this, and this. Looking at their resume and asking them, and sometimes I'm like, uh, you know, there's some people that just like don't think that way. Like that's like sometimes my concern of like there are some transferable stuff that exists within your story, that actually line up with the position that you want to do. Just because you don't have like there's just like things that like make sense. Like for some of the clients I have, they've been translating for their parents for since they were 3 years old. You know,
Yeah.
really important documents and different things like that, and throughout their entire life translating for their parents. That is a skill. A
Yeah.
lot of people that don't have like that's a skill that you were raised in. And so like there's not like this formal thing, but like how can we even like within an organization see that as a skill, see that as a value, see that as a culture add, when we think even about that, just because somebody doesn't have a formalized even training in like translation. Obviously, I
Yeah.
know that there are some positions that like need that formalized training, but just like
Right.
I'm thinking in general, you know what I'm saying?
Really love the perspective that you talked there about their hiring. So many times when we're going through this hiring process and we're looking at resumes and we're looking at all of these different people, we've hopefully tried to do a really good job of getting a large number of applicants from a diverse set of world experiences. And a lot of times our process for looking at applications is who do I exclude?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm going through it saying, all right, well, you don't meet the qualifications. You don't meet
Yep.
the qual. I love the perspective of thinking about how do I include them? What is in their background that's unique about their story that
Mm-hmm.
actually makes them the right fit for this job? Not
Yep.
just they've never worked in the specific role that I'm hiring for, but they've got all this rich history,
Mm-hmm.
doing all this other stuff. And I absolutely, so talking about our own business,
Mm.
one of my products is run, the guy who runs it now, we hired him. He was a high school biology teacher. He did not have
Okay.
any experience running a product. He didn't have
Mm-hmm.
any experience marketing. What we thought he could do well in conversations was take a complex idea and make it
Mm.
easy for people to understand. And
Yes.
we had software that we wanted people to understand and engage with. So we hired him initially as a writer, and now he runs the entire product. And I think that's that idea of like looking for people for the depth of their experience. And you may
Mm-hmm.
find that you have someone super special for a role that you might have excluded because they
Mm-hmm.
just didn't check the box of, oh, they've worked in that role before. And so I love that idea of looking for uh, how to include them, not how to exclude them.
Absolutely. And it's not the thing is too is that it is a lot of extra work to do it that way, right? It's a lot of
Mhm.
extra work, a lot of asking additional questions, examining that, which the current process of hiring, the current process of like looking at applicants and all that stuff is already one costly, but two very, very time consuming. And so even what I'm talking for is like even the recommendation of this is like almost radical in a way,
Yeah.
taking this nuanced approach to even like how you decide who's going to be on your team, or what even kind of who is in your pool, right? But I think even the way that we do what, as we've seen in the last 2 years with the Great Resignation and so many people applying for jobs, the way that the current model of like even interviewing and applying for jobs, it's so outdated. Like the idea to, I'm going to submit a cover letter, then I'm going to submit an application, then I'm going to give you my resume. I'm repeating the same information and adding on to the work. And so I even think that those models need to be reshifted, changed, rethought, reimagined, not just to be more inclusive, but uh, to like shake up some of our workplaces. And I think we would be pleasantly surprised when we have, and statistics prove this, research proves this, that when we have more diverse, a more diverse company, not just by ideas and thoughts and backgrounds, but like just culturally, all of the things, they tend to be more innovative and more profitable. Like it's just a fact. And so like
Yeah.
it might be worth it to re-examine these like hiring practices and stuff like that. So that's just my 2 cents on it. I know it's a leadership podcast, but like I'm really passionate about the whole gambit of how organizations are run. And I think to some extent it starts with hiring, not just who's in the lead, but like how are you bringing more people on your team and creating that culture?
Oh, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
On the podcast, one of the and circles in general, and in our own business, our whole focus is about developing people first leaders. And in order to be a people first leader, sometimes you have to do things the harder way, the radical way, in order to get at the core of what you really want to accomplish. And so, by being a people first leader, sometimes that does mean that, you know, I hate to say it, but this, you talk about resumes and cover letters, and these people who use these systems because they get thousands of resumes that just basically throw them out if they don't have certain keywords in there. Like they're being scraped by a machine, and if they don't find the word that they want, they just kind of toss it aside. And granted, if you're a major corporation and you're getting tons and tons of applicants, that's maybe the a necessary evil of your hiring process. But as a smaller business, when you're talking under 100 people in your company, you have the opportunity to do things. I always say this in startups, right? Do things that don't scale. Like in the early days, when you can do the stuff that doesn't scale. Even with this podcast, I send out some gifts to the guests after we record. Don't want to ruin the surprise for you, Jonathan, but there's something coming.
Yes.
But I can't keep that up on my own forever. But it's an early stage of the podcast. I want to do something a little special. And so you do those things that don't scale. And in the early start of your business, when you're small, you get to do those things that don't scale and actually
Mhm.
can have a better impact on who you bring on your team. Now, speaking of people first leadership, you talk a lot about organizational culture. And I know you've been thinking a lot about the power structure of
Mhm.
organizational culture and how does that work. Tell me a little bit about some of your thoughts on leadership in organizational culture and how we can make our organizations more equitable, more diverse as we move forward.
Yeah. So here's another go radical idea for you. And it really comes from, I'm not going to claim this because it's not mine, but it comes from like indigenous wisdom, from native thinkers and more collective communities. So like we think about decision making power within organizations. We currently how we do it in Western society is a triangle. And so it's top down, right? And so like I'm your manager, I'm your leader, I'm going to tell you what you're going to do, instead of like incorporating the team, incorporating the department, and trying to figure it out how together how we're going to navigate, this decision, this thing, right? And my thoughts about this is it's more, it comes from my background, not just from like the indigenous wisdom and different things like that, but just like my my values of teamwork, my belief in the teams that are the people that are around me. And so I think back, and the reason why I believe in this so much and I believe it can work is because I'm thinking back to I in my previous role right before I went out on my own. I was tasked with taking over I used to manage co-working spaces. And so I had one that was relatively small, only about 20, 25,000 square feet. about 150, 150 seats. So it wasn't really big. But then, pandemic hit. There was some shakeups in positions, all this different things. And so I was tasked with taking on one that was closer to 70,000 feet, 75,000. And then it had like closer to like 1,000 seats or something like that. And then I took on like a million combined between the two was like $1 million in revenue. Like for me, like that, that's a lot for me. So I mean, I'm a middle manager, like newer to like this level of like sales and everything like that. And so I had a team that, to be quite frank and honest, um, was not just because of the pandemic, but because the last person that had that place just 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 ran over them, just like
Yeah.
steamrolled over them, didn't inquire about how they felt about decisions. And he was new, and some of them have been there for 4 or 5 years, and so the knowledge of that place existed within the team, but he made decisions based off of what he believed was right and didn't involve them in either. There's some
Right.
other things I believe that were the cause of that, but I'll save that for another podcast. Not gonna badmouth anybody, but the but so what I did was, and there was one person that was on the verge of quitting, and I knew for a fact that this person had, um, I believe a lot of people have potential, but like there was something there, and I don't think it was just untapped. And I feel like because she would come and cover at the site, and so one of the things I decided to do was just say, "Hey y'all, we're gonna restart. We're gonna restart." I didn't use the things of like, I'm managing y'all. I didn't do anything like that. I said we are going to be a team. And so like when there's a decision that needs to be made or anything like that, I'm gonna ask for y'all's input. And I really want your honest answers. And there was more times than not, like I would ask them, like, hey, should we move forward with this? Is this right? What do y'all think? And involve them. Morale shot up in the middle of a pandemic. Morale shot up, and in fact, I got notified that they spoke up more in other meetings. They were more involved in other projects across the organization, not just on our team. They were starting to, before it was just like that one person making sales. Everybody on the team was closing and making sales. Happiness shot up. Everybody was laughing. We were connecting because we felt the team, and there was a shared distribution of power. I didn't say that I'm going to just like do this. Obviously, the final say comes to me because like if there's sometimes I have a little bit more knowledge, and I'll let them in on what I can let them in on. But like that's what I'm talking about, and like I just see the dramatic impact and the dramatic effect of just like not letting your ego as a leader guide your decision making, but like involving the people around you and saying like, what do you think about this? And I really want your honest opinion, and taking that into account. And if you believe that they're like not just believing, but like also taking risks on what they suggest too, like sometimes like they suggested something and we did it and it didn't work. But you know what? I encourage them to take those risks again. And it was just an awesome thing. I still have context with that team to this day, and seeing them do amazing, amazing things in the organization. It's incredible. But not to toot my own horn, but just to use that as an example of the power of like not letting your ego take over, divesting and moving into a space of like community wisdom and a shared knowledge, instead of just like this individualistic, I hold all the knowledge, I hold all the keys, which is really this faux egotistical like form of leadership, which I don't really abide by or believe in. Yeah.
Yeah, I really love how in that story too, it demonstrates the power that leaders have to give their team members a voice beyond even their own teams. You
Mhm.
talk about how you got word back that people on your team were more vocal in other areas, in other
Mhm.
meetings, in other places, because what you did was you said your voice matters,
Yes. Yeah.
you are valuable. You're a
Exactly.
part of this team. I hired you, or you were hired, whether it was me or someone else, you were put on this team because you have knowledge and skill and experiences, either in the industry or different than my own. And you can
Mhm.
add to that. And that empowerment, they were able to take that away from your meetings and bring that to other areas of their life, which I think goes so well to what you were talking about, even in the very beginning of, separating our personal and professional life. As leaders, we don't always realize that we actually do impact the personal lives of our teams
Mm-hmm.
by how we empower them and how we give them energy and fulfillment in their work. One of my goals for my team members is ultimately to figure out what energizes you in your roles,
Mm-hmm.
what brings you fulfillment, and how do I create that for you in a way that the organization still gets benefit, but so do you. And when I
Yes.
can find a way where we both win, we both win. Like, that's
Yes.
ultimately the point. So I
Absolutely.
love that demonstration of leadership, giving your team a voice and sharing that, demonstrating value so that they can feel valuable beyond just even in that meeting.
Absolutely. And it really comes from a mentality of abundance and not scarcity, right? Like me as a leader, it's not that I have anything to lose, but what can I gain, right? What can we all gain from you? And I just wouldn't even come back to something. I don't like we can't give them a voice. We're reminding them that they have one, right? We're reminding them of their thoughts, their ideas, even the risks that they want to take are valuable and they mean something, and they can have as much impact as I can. And just because I have a title doesn't make me any better than you. It's just I might have a little bit more experience than you, or have a little bit more knowledge in this area. But like you still might, it's whatever you bring to the table is definitely still valuable because you're here. You know what I'm saying? And so yeah, I really try and operate out of abundance, and I try and remind people that there's so much to go around. So much to go around. We don't have to operate out of a mindset of scarcity when it comes to recognition, doing the work, doing a good job, and providing impact for not only clients but our team members, the organization, society, all those different things.
Yeah. You talk about sharing power and empowering your team, and I love that nuance too. And I think you're right. We can't give someone a voice; they have a voice.
Hmm.
We can simply let them use it and give space for them to
Yes, yeah.
use what they already have. And I love that distinction. What are some other ways leaders in an organization can empower their teams, share power, share leadership to their teams, and develop them, or at least give them room to shine and win, uh, in an organizational culture?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is understanding that everybody communicates differently. And so like just because like you have some people that talk up a lot in a meeting, sometimes they have something to say, sometimes they don't. But you have to you got to remember like there are other ways that others communicate. And so like understanding those communication styles and providing room for those communication styles as well. Not everybody likes to talk up in a meeting, but they'll talk one-on-one. And so like remembering in your check-ins to like come back to like how did you feel about that meeting? Was there anything that I missed? Was there anything that you want to contribute to this? Like we still haven't made a decision here. I just want to make sure that everybody's heard on the team. What are your thoughts? And just being willing to ask that additional question can be so impactful. And more times than not, when I did that, they didn't have anything to share. It's fine. But when I did, it was so valuable what they provided. I'm like, literally didn't even think of that, didn't consider that, didn't see that. Thank you so much for sharing. I think another way, when people take risks, um, when people put themselves out there and it is like really uncomfortable for them and they fail and they fall short, because sometimes they won't, but when they do, don't beat them up about it. Even if it costs y'all something, even if it costs the team something, ask the question, because they know they did bad. Ask the question, all right, what did you learn? Like what did we learn? How can we grow from this situation? And again, operating not at a place of loss or scarcity, but operating out of a place of abundance and growth. How can we move on and move up from this situation? Like those are the top two things I can think of right off the bat. And then just I think always just like examining who was at your table, examining who was always speaking up, examining who was there and present. um, and if it's the same kind of mentality, same kind of look, feel, If you got like a siloed kind of like thing going on for your team, maybe you got to rethink that and kind of like do some interrogating of where that comes from, right? And for if everybody on my team is a man, I'm going to evaluate that. Whether we're black, all of us are black, white, Latinx, or anything like that, I'm going to examine that because we don't have the full width of that. Or if we're all, we have to really examine that because we're not getting the full perspective of that. And so, how do we engage with other perspectives and bringing those voices in as well? So, those are the top three things that I think of.
Those are extremely solid, and I hope
Yeah.
everyone takes heart to those. Especially, I think about what you said, how people communicate differently. We talk a lot on the podcast. We bring it up a lot about one-on-ones. That
Hmm.
is a great opportunity for you to learn and connect with your team members and understand how do they communicate,
Hmm.
how do they receive praise, how do they give feedback, how do they receive feedback,
Yeah.
and by knowing that, you can actually engage team members in a powerful and fruitful way
Hmm.
where they can actually give the value that they have in a way that they feel comfortable and safe to do so. And I appreciate too, I actually just talked about this in a previous episode, this idea, this freedom to fail and to fail
Hmm.
gracefully and to
Yeah.
learn from our failures. Failures ultimately are opportunities for us to grow and learn and be better than we were before. And so I love that. And to be honest, the people at the table, it's one that hits home. Just being completely honest, when I started my business, I hired friends who were, right around me, close to me. And so it didn't take long for me to realize that I had a bunch of white dudes on my team.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
was about the only voice that I was hearing. And
Hmm.
how can I properly serve a diverse customer base when
Hmm.
we only see one perspective? And
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
we've been working on it. And I'm not saying that we're doing great at it because,
Yeah.
we're still not a huge team. We're about 25 people and we still have a lot of room to go. But what you said is like looking at who you have at the table,
Hmm.
who's there, really hits home with me. And I'm constantly trying to figure out like, how do we be better? How do we do better? How do we get a more diverse group of voices at the table?
Hmm.
So that, because speaking, that actually comes to one of my thoughts, right?
Hmm.
We talk a lot about fulfillment.
Hmm.
Fulfillment is an important part of the conversation on this podcast, in my company. And when I think about who's at the table, uh, I wonder, it seems to me that having a more diverse group of people in your organization and at the table actually amplifies the fulfillment of everyone at the table, even those who are not of a minority, or you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
in the organization. I think it adds value to everyone. Would you say that's true? And how do you think diversity helps an organization be healthier, be more
Yeah.
fulfilled?
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, hmm. You said something and I wanted to come back to it, but it's gone. Maybe it'll come back to me. But honestly, so having a diverse team, and oh, that's what I was gonna say. I want to just touch on this real quick. So to
Yeah,
speak on even the diverse team thing, we don't want to get into like this mindset of just like having a person of color at the table equals diversity, right?
right.
Just being really explicit, like this also includes like somebody who thinks differently from you. So like if somebody comes from a different background, different culture, um, values, all those different things. Obviously, you want organizational cultural alignment as far as like values and everything like that. But I'm talking about values as far as personal self. But there is something along those lines of like this faux diversity of like we have diversity, but we don't have inclusion, we don't have equity, we don't have justice, right? And like that's the money part of where you want to get to,
Yeah,
where there is not just a diverse group of people, not just an inclusive place of people, but a place of belonging. And to get to your point just now, when we think about belonging, right, when everybody feels like this is a great place to be, and you see different people and you're learning different things, and I mean, food inevitably comes into play because everybody loves eating, what I'm saying, and music and different things like that, and you're getting exposed to different things. It's like a truly incredible experience, like some of my happiest times is like introducing my white wife to like something from my culture. Like it's really one of my funnest things of like just going downtown, because I live in LA, so going downtown and just like getting soul food and just loving it up, and she loves to eat too. So it's just like all these different things are incredible, right? And so like it's every day we have an opportunity to learn. Every day we have an opportunity to communicate and um, interact with somebody different. It's not a scary thing. Like when you feel and create, like when leaders create a space of belonging, it actually like creates this space of like where of trust, of vulnerability, um, of hard and honest dialogue. When you could do that with the people that you work with, where you spend a lot of time with, like you can't help but be happy. You can't help but feel fulfilled. Like there's something to that, right? And there's probably some statistics and research that go there. It's just not coming to my mind
Sure.
at the moment. Well, I'm speaking to it. Just I can't lead you to a direct research that I've read, but all of those things exist. And I just think of some of my best team moments where I could trust the person next to me, where I could be my authentic self. And if we need to have a hard conversation, we can have a hard conversation, and we can move and grow from it. And we're all, everybody's successful, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why I think it's so important. That's why I think it's so crucial, and that's why I'm like baffled that like a lot of organizations are like catching on within the last like 10ish years that this is something that's important, right?
Yeah.
Again, at least as far as like this resurgence of the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Um, Obviously, there's been things that have been going on for years, but just a resurgence in the last 5 to 10ish years. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, it's certainly, I mean, it's certainly a hot, it seems to be a buzz topic at times.
yeah,
But I think there are people, like us who are having this conversation. It's funny. I have always cared about it. And
mm,
yet, I found myself in a situation where, because I wasn't examining myself and I wasn't
mm,
being self reflective in the decisions that I was making, I found myself accidentally creating something I didn't want to create and
mm-hmm,
creating a culture that I didn't ultimately want to create. And it
yeah,
wasn't intentional. And that's the
yeah,
thing. Like you
yep,
can you can unintentionally create a not a great culture,
yeah,
and you can accidentally stumble into an amazing culture. And I think what's nice is our culture at our organization is healthy and it's strong, and we all want those same things, but I know there's ways for us to grow and continue to develop that. And I love that this just the communal and connection together. One of my theories in fulfillment in general as leaders, our responsibility is to give our teams clarity, collaboration, and connection. And that
mm,
connection piece is really important. And in a remote culture,
yes,
harder than ever
yep.
to create true connection with the team members. And that's something I'm also always kind of thinking about, is like, how do you build that equity? How do you build that belonging? How do you build
Mm,
that connection? And not just, and I say this is true from a diversity standpoint, but it's just true from an organizational standpoint.
mm,
What do you recommend to help build greater connection, belonging, and equity within an organization? What are
yeah.
some steps that somebody could try to start?
Absolutely. I think it starts with like to go back to even your point about like accidentally creating a culture that, like even like a monoculture, right? Of just like, oh, I'm looking around and everybody looks like me, right? It's just
Yeah.
like paying attention to like the things that you're doing, right? Because like we grow up a certain way and it just seems natural to just go about this way. But like taking the extra step and the extra care and interrogating how we're building something, who we're inviting in, decision making, all these different things. Because like sometimes it's just as little, it just is that one step of like asking that additional question, like who am I missing? Who's who's impacted by this decision? How are they impacted by this decision? Different things like that. That's the number one I would say is like just ask one more question.
Yeah.
One more question. Um, Realistic steps, practical steps you can take now. Um, uh, Understanding. So like there's plenty of like I don't want to just like recommend books and podcasts and stuff like that, but like I would say, as on an individual level, find ways to make yourself feel uncomfortable. And why do I say that? The reason why is because when we are comfortable, we will make decisions. And going back to the things our natural bend is to do things that like just make sense, and like that we'll navigate and fit into the pieces that like seem okay for us, right? So like for me, like I naturally bend and go towards, all black folks, you know what I'm saying? And like having black folks on my podcast and like hanging out with black friends and all that stuff. But like, am I really going to get the fullness of diversity, right? If I have like this whole thing, and it's a little different because like, having like black spaces for me is really important. But like, I'm
Sure.
talking about from like, if we're trying to do this from an organizational standpoint, um, it really is to like, what are some ways that you can make yourself feel uncomfortable? And say you're like, honestly, in Midwest, like the suburbs in the Midwest, it's not going to be diverse, like, and so like, I would recommend like listening to podcasts from black and brown folks, like people that don't look like you, or even like people that don't even have the same sexual orientation or bend or that are on the gender spectrum, right? And learning from those communities and like really uplifting and supporting those communities in ways can like have you rethinking and challenge you and making you feel uncomfortable and challenging the status quo and disrupting your own mindset and perspective. Um, Gosh, other things. I feel like it goes along with a lot of the other things that I've shared today.
Yeah.
You know, asking that additional question, like seeing other people, taking the extra time to see other people, how are they doing, paying attention. Oh, this is another one. Paying attention to what's happening in society. The reason why that is important is because like, and I say this because like this is a majority of the time I've heard this from my white colleagues, but like something will happen in the news to black and brown folks, to um, yeah, just like different things like that that'll happen. And there is no like recognition of those things happening. It's just like another thing that has happened in the news, right? And for me, I carry that. I can't, it's hard for me to see, those videos of black people abused by folks who are sworn to protect. Like it's hard for me to see that. And so like that impacts my work, right? That impacts those. And so like that goes along with making yourself uncomfortable, but it also is understanding how that could potentially impact your team, how that can impact your organization, and different things like that. So a jumble of things at the end, but like a lot of things that I already said throughout our conversation today, you could really like do right now,
Yeah.
besides just listening to podcasts and reading books. Like there's things that, go eat different foods, like experience different things, make yourself feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
I want to say no. What you said there at the end too, I think is powerful, and it's definitely a gut check for me uh, to think about. Like, first of all, am I just making decisions that make me comfortable? And
Mm,
am I looking outside of myself to grow? And in order to grow, I have to be stretched, and stretching is uncomfortable sometimes.
mm,
And so, to allowing myself to be stretched beyond my comfort zone, and then I wrote down here, right? People first leaders have to think about what the decisions that they make, how they impact the people they serve
mm,
and all of the people that they serve, not, and so
yeah.
as I wrote that down, I thought about what you said about too, like world events. And, I struggle with that too, right? Like you come into the office, or you come into your, communication tool the next day from, after a big event like that on the news, and a people first leader has to consider, right? Like, how's my team feeling right now?
Mm,
Like, this could be really impacting them, and they may be shook,
yeah.
and and it should matter to the leaders of an organization that their team is shook. Anyone
Yeah.
in their team is shook. And so
Yeah.
I think that's super powerful.
Mm,
Jonathan, thank you so much. I want to give you the last word. Is there
yeah.
anything that you want to share? How people can get in touch with you? Anything like that?
No, just a major shout out to you. This has been a pleasure to speak with you, James. If you are interested in learning more about me, reaching out to me, working with me, you can reach me on my website, commonculturecc.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, Jonathan L. Dumas, on LinkedIn, and then Common Culture CC on all socials. different things like that. I do coaching and consulting for organizations, trying to, create thriving cultures, and working one-on-one with individuals on leadership and career development, which really entails, examining if you're stuck, lost, and kind of passionless. How do we reignite that in you and do an archaeological dig on what you got going on under there, and launch you into what you want to do? So yeah, I'm really excited. This was awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing from you folks, and seeing what this podcast becomes, because I know it's newer. So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're going to put links to everything that Jonathan mentioned in the show notes, so be sure you check that out. And I will certainly be reaching out on socials to connect.
Absolutely. Let's do that. And I forgot to mention, I also am a podcast host. I have a podcast. It's called Real Talk with Duma. I've been going for 2 years. And so if you're interested in like hearing these everyday conversations, meaningful, substantive conversations with the people I see every day, you can check that out as well. I'm on all major
Absolutely.
platforms. Yep.
Awesome. We'll look for that link in the show notes. Jonathan, thank you again so much for being on Leading to Fulfillment. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
What a great conversation. And thanks again to Jonathan for joining me on this episode of Leading to Fulfillment. Everything we mentioned, including a full transcript of the show, is available over on our website, and you can access it anytime you want by visiting leadingtofulfillment.com/012. That's leadingtofulfillment.com/012. Bringing someone new onto your team, regardless of how big that team is, has an impact on the culture of that team. Of course, it makes sense that you think about this impact, right? Hiring someone can make your team exponentially better or exponentially worse. This drives many employers to put a lot of emphasis on whether or not an applicant is a culture fit. However, all too often, the phrase culture fit is used to tell employees why they weren't chosen for a position. At best, it's become a default for employers who don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And at worst, it's become an excuse for racism and prejudice. Unfortunately, what we often mean by culture fit is, does this person look, talk, and act like us? If this is a question that drives your hiring decisions, you're going to end up with a company made up of people with the same experiences and beliefs. And what good does that do for you, your business, or your customers? I'm not saying that culture fit isn't important, but what we need to really think about is what we mean by that phrase. Don't dismiss people because they aren't like you. Actually, do the opposite. Look for people who aren't like you. Diversity of people and experience expands who we can be. It's about hiring people for who we want to become, not who you are. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode. And until then, may your businesses be successful as you lead your teams to fulfillment.